All right, welcome, folks. We are back with another episode of the Unplanned show. My guest today is Martin Vincent, who is one of our experts based in EMEA, focused on our automation portfolio. And he and I were having a Slack thread a couple of weeks ago about platform engineering. And so I said, you know what, let's bring this topic to the Unplanned show and just share what you've been seeing just with our audience. Before we dive into that, we're having a Slack thread a couple of weeks ago. Before we dive into that, I'm just going to pull up what we have as our upcoming episodes. We've got today Martin Vincent, as you can see. Next week, we're going to have James Urquhart from VMware talking about flow architecture. He's written an O'Reilly book about it in the last couple of years, and I caught up with him over at GlueCon a couple of months ago. So I think that's going to be an interesting conversation. Then on the 21st, we'll have Mitra Goswami, our senior director of data science here at PagerDuty. She's giving a talk at DataCon LA on August 12th, which is, gosh, that's this weekend. So we're going to kind of catch her after that and hear what her talk was about. And then August 28th, we have Donnie Burkholz, and you might recognize him. He's been active on kind of the DevOps and DevOps Days scene for a while. But he and I were catching up over sort of some of the changes in ITIL and sort of bridging that gap. Actually, will really, I think, be interesting building on today's conversation around platform engineering, because he's been digging in a lot around, sort of platform as product and platform space as well. So these episodes will go well together, I think. But with that, let's get into it. Martin, let's just level set. First and foremost, platform engineering is one of those terms that's been kind of growing in awareness and popularity. I'm seeing, everyone from folks on Twitter to the Gartners of the world talking about it, publishing about it. How do you define platform engineering?
Yeah, and my definition is not the market's definition. It's sort of my observation and indeed how I look at the platform itself. I would say platform engineering, or the platform that people use internally, is a real internal tool. It's an internal place where people can push a button, and by the push of a button, something is created. And usually it's used by IT operations people, developers, and that click of a button could be something simple like, I need a new virtual machine, or I need an application, or I need this firewall port to be opened so I can reach an end destination. Or it could be, I need 5 machines with a database and an application. So it could be a simple self-service request that people sort of request via that self-service environment, then being built under the hood with a lot of complex technologies, a lot of different scripting languages maybe being used, but a real place where you go to for your internal IT organization to request some IT, and then it's been built with automation behind it. So again, focuses on internal stuff. So if you are a developer and you develop an application for your end customers, maybe you need like an environment to test your new software. And usually in the old times, you went back to the IT department and say, well, I need an environment to test my application. Within this era of infrastructure as code, you have a way. You go to a platform and you say, I want XXX. You click on a button and it's deployed automatically. So again, I think it's an internal platform for IT operations where there's like standardized processes. You request it's been built based on compliancy norms internally, with security in mind, obviously. And it's the way to go to where you need new IT resource.
Yeah.
Which could be again anything. Like I said, the deployment of compute, but could also be like getting data out of a database. There are many use cases around it.
Yeah. Well, I think that that brings it to, some really clear sort of litmus test of are we talking about platform engineering or not? We're talking about an internal use case, and you mentioned there's a standardized process, but you've gone beyond that. You've automated it, right, to make it self-service. And I think, connecting back to the word platform in that case makes sense, where, what's the difference between, just any kind of self-service and a platform, right? Like, platform is really about how do you get that zero incremental cost, right? For like the definition of a platform, right, is like something that you can add in more of something without really a material cost. And so you're not having to recreate something every single time. And that's to your point, where like scripting and automation comes in. But I think sometimes that when you get into like platform economics, you kind of distract from the fundamental, like, on a day-to-day basis, what does this look like, right? It looks like I, as a user, have a way of getting what I need very quickly, and through a sort of simple self-service experience.
Yeah, but there are two ways. So you got the consumers of the platform that request anything that they need for their work.
Mm-hmm.
The DevOps team, or I don't know, could even be marketing in a way if they need data again.
Yeah.
But you've got the other users that create that automation in that platform. And those are the people that usually script. They build an application which actually sort of spins up those servers in any public cloud environment or in your own cloud environment with the needed permissions and all that. So in my view, the platform is a place where you go to consume it when you need automation, but you got other people within engineering. Those are the real platform engineers that create the automation.
Yeah.
And if they've done it once and they've done it properly, it can be used, but also easily copied for other use cases. So, for example, if you need to get data out of multiple different databases, well, you can make a job, as we say it, within the platform. But in the end, if somebody says, well, I need the same job, but for other databases or for other specific data, it's easy to reuse again.
That makes sense.
I always see it like twofold. You got the creators versus the consumers of that platform.
Yeah. So now, stepping back, thinking about like where are we as an industry in terms of taking this type of approach? Is it something that we're still pretty early and just kind of bleeding edge types of organizations are doing it, or is this starting to kind of catch on? Or how would you describe where we are in terms of adoption?
Yeah, I think we're not far at all. Maybe it's a bit of my Dutch skeptical view on it, but I think in this question, it's also good, like, where do we come from? And in terms of infrastructure, it's always been a set of components. And 10, 20 years ago, you managed a component individually.
Mm-hmm.
And then scale became a problem. Then you needed ways to manage like a large amount of devices, IoT or switching or routing or firewalling. Anything that comes with volume becomes a problem.
Yeah.
So then we, of course, have, let's say, the Terraforms and the Ansibles of this world, the infrastructure as code part.
Yeah.
But if you are in a, let's say, security team, you might be using Ansible to configure all those multi-vendor firewalls. Great. But then you've got your cloud team, and maybe that cloud team is specialized in Azure. And then later in time, some other C-level individual thought, let's go multi-vendor. We need also Google Cloud and AWS, and you got your multi-cloud. And by that time, you got like 5, 6, 7 different teams that all use their infrastructure's code, complex scripting language, other than the PowerShell guys from Windows, or I mean, the puppets and the shell. So it's a plethora of scripting languages and automation in those different teams. And then there's like an insight like, oh my, it's difficult to manage, it's becoming costly. I don't have enough people that has the knowledge of all those different. Let's get it into one place and simplify. And that's where people start thinking about how do we make a central platform that sort of allows us to consume it in a simple way, but also enforce standardization and and that people don't wander around and use a credit card to spin up some machines, the old shadow IT in a way. So
Yeah.
the history of managing simple single components towards infrastructure as code with volume, different scripting languages. For me, there was like we in IT were very good in simplifying stuff, but a few years later we are very good in making it more complex. Versus now we're trying to simplify again. It's like a bit of a sinus wave.
Yeah, the pendulum is swinging and it's creating a sine wave. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, so I hear you in that it's like we've got, to sort of make a distinction between platform engineering and automation, which automation on some level, it's been around for a long time. And to your point, right, there have been lots of different tools and paradigms out there. But then you run into this issue, if I'm hearing you right, where different teams start to adopt different paradigms. And as soon as you run into use cases that cross teams, you start to quickly run into like, well, we can't train everybody on Terraform. Like that's not the point. Even though the security team is using it, and we're not going to train everybody. It's the same thing with, does every developer need to learn all the AWS APIs just because they want to build, on AWS? It's a pretty high cognitive overhead. So it's what I'm hearing is the same kind of almost developer experience gap that our friends over at Red Monk have written about for a couple of years now. There's a similar kind of platform experience gap that can occur when you've just got pockets and islands of automation and scripting, and it hasn't really been packaged together into an experience so that end user, back to your point, where someone's creating and someone is consuming, what is the consumer experience of, I need these resources, like where do I go? I don't want to have to go learn all the different configuration and deployment tools that every single team that I need to touch has decided to use. Is that?
Definitely. And what I find interesting in this situation is that it's so hard to get the right employees to work for you, for your company, that a lot of organizations tell their developers, use whatever you like. As long as you're happy and you stay with us, because we need your knowledge and we need you to help. And some developers have a preference for A, for B, for C, for D. And again, that doesn't really help if you scale out or if you need to share knowledge. So definitely the need for, a place to go to develop or consume within that platform engineering idea definitely makes sense in the time where we are now. But I would say we're just starting with it. I mean, if you look on LinkedIn for functions and you scan for platform engineers, you will find some now. But it's growing heavily, fast. In a way. But a year ago, nobody really talked about it.
Yeah. So what do you think's changed? What's kind of heightened more awareness of this?
Yeah, I think the infrastructure as code, the API world, connecting everything together, that complexity curve has went up, and we're now at a point that people say it's no longer manageable. We need to think about simplicity, how we're going to do that. How are we doing that? And people see others doing it, and definitely there are early adopters that already have a platform with their own UI, their own red colors and their green buttons and simple ways to request your IT, versus others are still struggling with their, Puppet platform or their dedicated Terraform platform just for that one scripting language. So they see in the world that there are multi-scripting platforms out there that could help them move forward instead of those multicolored solutions.
Yeah. You mentioned kind of like a UI. So like the platform experience for those internal users has its own user interface to help them interact with behind the scenes what's actually could be all kinds of different scripting languages that are getting run and accessed. But that's abstracted away.
Correct. And in that platform, there are a lot of, let's say, connections to the out there world. For example, something like a Git, where people store their code, do their testing. That's great. Keep it there.
Yeah.
As long as if you have the platform and you execute, it should pull the code from Git, run it, and then great. And if the platform engineering decides to change the script, they store it again in Git, and the next time somebody's using the platform engineering side to execute it, it takes again the new script. So this is a way that we utilize, let's say, other platforms for their specialism. So I would say Git for repositories, and in terms of access, we need to make sure that it connects to your single sign-on solution, whatever it may be. It could be Okta, could be Ping, could be AD, could be Azure single sign-on. We don't care. And it should come from those kinds of solutions. But then you've also make sure that if people execute a automation task, that they're really allowed to do it. I mean, it would be weird if somebody gets access to the platform and requests IT, which is super expensive. In the end, somebody needs to pay for it, but they're not allowed to run it. So the security component, giving the right people access to the, let's say, the menu card they can request from the platform, is also very important. But again, those whole access part, that should come from single sign-on. Yeah, and then you got your infrastructure. Great, but do you want to hand over API keys? No. People have a vault, and having a vault is standard these days. Everybody has a vault. So the platform itself should interconnect with vaults. If you run something, you get your SSH permissions or your API keys from the vault. And if somebody changes the keys, great, do that in the vault. Don't do it in the platform itself. So within the platform engineering, we do say one place, or I see one place where people can request or create. But in reality, there are a lot of interconnections with other, let's say, specialist components like the SSO, or like the vaults, or like the Git Hub, or GitLabs, or TeamCity, Jenkins. There are many tools out there that are very good at let's say, testing software and having a repository. I don't see the platform engineering part being used for that.
Yeah. You've got to, it's the connective tissue between all of these different services and components, but it's like a bag of bits that any of your internal users, if they're all going to have to stitch together kind of all these bits themselves, it's going to come out, every which way and every which color. And then over time, that becomes incredibly difficult to support. So by building a platform experience and saying, listen, we're going to actually invest engineering cycles to say, every time someone wants to do this, right, it's going to follow this defined pattern and process. And we're going to actually engineer how this API is called and where the keys are going to come from, and and make sure it's all front-ended with access. Is that?
Yeah, that's a correct assumption. This is how I look at it, and I see the sort of the enterprise IT evolving by using something like this.
Yeah. So what are you seeing as you work with customers? Like, it's you're saying we're still really early, but from the customers that you see that are moving along with this, like, what does success look like? What does good look like? What's working out there?
Yeah, so success is usually in our world defined in terms of how much manual hours did we save versus what the platform provides for people. I think the best outcome of having a good functional platform is that you, as an organization, are more lean and mean, as they say. Well, you can make a turn if needed, quick and fast, which is also the promise of, let's say, the public cloud, for example. I mean, the idea between public cloud is if you need it, you build it, you pay for it. And if you don't need it, don't use it, don't pay for it, right? But in reality, how much organizations are that lean with their public cloud environment? How many of them build their computing cloud and cloud terminate it in the weekend if it's no longer needed? I do know some of them that do that, and I praise them for it, but many out there have the provisioning of, let's say, their compute completely automated, but the decommissioning, if it's no longer needed, it's not many do that. So I think there is a lot to win to utilize them more and think about that automation you could use for that.
Yeah, that's interesting because it's, that actually connects to some hard dollar cost savings that can be realized, which, getting more output from the team, hours saved, that type of thing is great. But in sort of today's economy, people are often looking for like, where's the hard dollar cost savings? And you bring up a really good point, which is, use the automation to also make turning off the service, decommissioning this or that, like part of the life cycle. It's a best practice, but like so many best practices, if it's not wired in, then you can't count on it actually happening.
And people are also having a sort of a stage fear, I think, or stage fright, how you call it in English.
Stage
for
fright,
for the audience here, I'm based in Amsterdam, so I didn't speak English until I was 15. No, but another interesting example. So in IT, people have failover. They have high availability, and the most commonly known is like, I've got data center 1, data center 2. If data center 1 doesn't work or is not reachable, we'll switch over to the other one. This is perfect for automation. Yeah. But in reality, people still want to have the ability to push the button if they need the failover. Where I think, come on, guys. I mean, it's super simple to measure that your applications are not reachable. And if it's like business critical, you should make the switch completely automatic. And it can. But I do still speak to customers that say, I get that whole idea of having a platform where people can do the self-service request. But if something goes wrong, I still want to push a button myself. And I don't want automation to do that for me. They're still sort of, like I said, trying to say stage fright. I think that's the word. But
or I think it's like, it's partly just building trust in the system. Like trusting that it's going to do what you think it's going to do. Does that seem to be the biggest hurdle to folks adopting kind of a platform engineering practice, or is there something else that's getting in the way, skills, training, like what's blocking people?
Yeah, it must be knowledge. I mean, the tools are out there, but there must be knowledge. And for sure, commercial companies are able to hire the best developers versus governments that have problems with spending lots of money on salaries for employees. So there's obviously always a difference in markets, and by that, the early adoptiveness.
Yeah.
So therefore, for sure, there are organizations that they're way beyond. I mean, I know a customer of ours actually at PagerDuty that use automation. And in that example I just gave you, they built a complete new data center when there's a disaster somewhere else. So if a tornado hits a specific region, they proactively switch to another data center, completely automatic. I love that, but those are unique. Majority are looking at failover of applications, not a whole data center.
Yeah.
And then it's still great if they think about it, but many out there say, well, it doesn't work. Let's switch over to another data center and let's first spin up some servers. Then let's create access and then make sure that the data is reachable out of a snapshot backup or something. But there's such a difference in maturity in a way, which is normal. I mean, it's in everywhere. I mean, every organization has its different maturity level, but again, in my assessment, and I would be keen to hear from the listeners or after the call, but I think we're just starting to sort of realize as an industry, we need a central place, simple to use. I keep on repeating myself, but it is true. Simple to use, super secure. Yeah, has architecture in mind. The people saying, well, you can use that, but you cannot use this. So the best practices should be part of that platform. And I think we as a company have a job to do to tell the people that it's possible in a simple way. There are solutions out there that could help them get a jump start.
The other thing that comes to mind that can be a blocker is even just organizational structure. And so sometimes I ask the question, it's like, whose job is this? And if it's on no one's list of jobs to be done, then sure enough, it's not going to get done.
True.
Are you seeing, and this is something I know I've kind of seen out there, is that the advocating for that there needs to be a team dedicated to this, because it doesn't really fit in with a lot of the day-to-day operations for IT, as you described, kind of with a lot of, if their roles are defined with ownerships of components and it's relatively siloed. I mean, we can imagine and we can talk about how limiting that is, but it's nonetheless, if that's the job to be done, then that's the job that's going to happen. And then the actual development teams, they're not really thinking about, well, how are we solving this across all teams, right? They're focusing on, like, we're trying to build this feature, we're trying to do this thing. And so it's this gap almost that sits between those development teams. And to your point, like, really, it could go beyond development teams, where it's like any team that's trying to request data, for example, a lot of other internal teams, you can go beyond that. But just as a starting point, the development teams they're not going to build the platform. And if the IT teams are like, well, this isn't really our primary job, then where are we going to carve out time? And you got to make it someone's job. And
Correct.
so are you seeing the emergence of, teams and people with the job of, my job is to build a platform internally for these types of use cases, and to bridge this gap between all of the components and the architecture, to your point, which includes like security and best practices, bridge that with all of the different consuming teams internally? Are you seeing those types of teams and roles emerge, or is that still a gap?
No, I don't see new teams emerge. I do see, let's say, the function more and more, the platform engineers and the terminology being used, and people adopting a vision to sort of create something like that internally. But for me, it's a bit like, in a simple analogy, you've got a house being built, you've got a house that needs to be maintained. And that maintenance parts, all the SREs, and within the maintenance or building a house, got your your DevOps cycle in a way. But the house is still being built with the hammers and nails and all that. Now we need people that have an vision, like, oh, if I do this electrically, I'm going to build the house way faster and more solid. So we need like a Makita view on IT, that we're going to use new tools, which you can use electrically, and then by that build way faster the end product that's been desired. But I still see teams that are focused on cloud versus teams focused on security or focused on Windows machines. There's a limited overview or umbrella idea, like, we're going to do this as a group, which needs to take place, or else you can never get into that platform engineering and vision.
Yeah. So it seems like someone needs to kind of sit there and translate and define, like, hey, instead of just looking at this from one silo, what is the experience that our internal users are looking for? That instead of, a bunch of different tickets, or having to pick up a bunch of different automation scripting tools, which they may or may not actually, to your point before, have access on the other side. Instead of trying to wire this all together ourselves, like someone saying, no, I'm gonna define this and actually figure out how to make it work. Seems like that is a role, whether it's a person or a team, that needs to just take that job. So
Maybe there's some sort of analogy with security. I mean, I don't know, 5, 10 years ago, there were no CISOs, there were no security officers focused on that specific topic. I don't know. Maybe we're going to get somebody in a specific role or responsibility that looks from an umbrella perspective into getting such a central place for IT requests, or I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, well, coming back to, what is success and what does good look like? There's the hours saved, which I guess then the question is, it's whose hours? Is it the hours of the consuming teams who used to have to spend a lot of time and request things and then wait because it wasn't very self-service, or they had to try to figure out how they were going to use all the different teams' various provisioning systems to provision the sort of net thing that they were looking for? Or is it saving the time of all the teams that would normally have to fulfill those requests and build things? Or is it both?
Both, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's always a good question to ask, like, how much hours or sometimes days does it cost you if you request compute with a certain level of memory and storage? And some say, well, it takes a couple of days, and that's already a great indication. But if they do request that and somebody then builds it, it's probably an IT expert of that environment, and for him it also takes time. So pretty simple if you get that in a place where people can request it themselves. For sure, some requests require approval from senior management if it encompasses extra cost. If you build something new, it usually comes with cost. But it saves time on both on the consume side for developers that need, let's say, IT infrastructure to build their own apps, or it's the time of the developer or the engineer that normally manages firewalls, or the engineer that normally manages Azure cloud. But it's both sides.
So, like, who do you think would be best equipped, or who should be taking responsibility for this?
That's a good one. Yeah, so the ideal person where I normally tend to speak to is the IT operations director or manager or above.
Mm-hmm.
But because it's still in the end IT operations.
Yeah.
Those are my best people to speak to. But then C-level is always looking to optimize and become more agile, and they get it. They get it that there's like a long waiting time. Something is created on a request, or there's always a problem like finding the right employees to support your organization. You got your skills and knowledge gap, which is always there. But for people to really understand it, IT operations directors or VPs or above, those are the best people to take the ownership and to make a decision on such a platform.
Yeah, and they ultimately have the access and ownership of the underlying resources that are feeding into it. It's just rethinking what the sort of access pattern looks like for those resources that they manage.
Yeah,
is kind of what it sounds like.
And I had an interesting one with a super big organization recently, and their let's say C-level said, my teams can use the software they want to use, like I said before, so freedom.
Yeah.
And in the end, they now have an architecture of, let's say, 5 different automation engines, but they all do consolidate to one single place where you can request it. So it's fun. So you got your teams that can still build their own IT with their own automation engine, but on top of it, there's a central place where it also all comes together. And it's a choice for consumers there. Do I go to the top level platform, or do I go to my own homegrown automation engine? But they're still connected. So I would say that's a step in between having a single platform versus having 5 or 6 different platforms. But it's fine. I mean, it's a journey for them. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. Well, so speaking of the journey, one more question to sneak in is kind of around just getting started. what do you recommend for folks getting started on this journey? What should they look at? What should they be learning? What should they be, where should they be trying to implement this first?
Yeah, so without sort of promoting our product too much, I would say there are two paths you could go. You could say, I want to start from scratch. I still continue to use Git for my repository and my testing. That's fine. But I'm going to make a UI that connects to it. And then I'll make a UI that connects to my security tools, like my single sign-on. I don't know, maybe you want to connect it to your node inventory from Ansible or from an ITSM tool. And then if you've done all that, you can build your jobs and make them available for other people to consume them. So that's one path you could follow. My preference would be look for a jumpstart, look for a platform that already has the ability to connect to those external, like I said before, the security part or testing tools or, I don't know, vaults, or if you already have that in place, which is off the shelf available, open source or commercially, as we sell it as a company, as a commercial product. But if you go that route, you have a jump start. And with that platform, you can also say, I want to build something on top of it with my own company colors. And so you can build your front end on top of a platform that's already been built for, let's say, the core functions.
Yeah.
And that would be my sort of go-to suggestion for everybody, even if I wouldn't work for the PagerDuty company. I mean, building something that connects to those external resources or that's already been done by us. And if you need to build it all by yourself, you're going to probably work on that for 2 years before you're actually ready to deploy the whole platform for your internal stakeholders.
Yeah. Okay. And I think you bring up a really good point around just as anyone is looking at tools and platforms or thinking about how they would even try to build something themselves, is keeping in mind that just the broad range of different systems and tools it will need to integrate with, and that being a really that'll kind of make or break, because if it won't work very well as a platform if it's like, well, you can actually only use it for this small set of use cases and everything else you have to go around it. The more you can kind of funnel into the same platform, then the more value and utility it has.
Yeah, and you got a point here. So if there would be a platform built and I don't know, the last 20% of the 100 is not available via the platform, you still have the risk that people would say, I'm not going to use the platform. I'm still going to do my own thing.
Right. Yeah. Pesky humans, sometimes they're just really tough to please. What can I say?
No, the pesky developers, I would say. We love them.
Well, thank you so much. That's been, I think there's been a lot of development in this area, and there's the technology challenges, but there's the people and the process side of things too, that seem to really make or break, how teams get started and how they succeed. But to your point, there's some really concrete benefits that come out of taking this platform approach in terms of saving time for both the consumers and the producers inside your organization, and the opportunity to apply best practices, whether that's security best practices, which will make the CISOs happy, and some cost savings practices like automatically shutting down, dev environments that were spun up, and after a certain time, let those expire and shut down, so they're not sort of zombie dev environments racking up charges like a teenager with a cell phone plan.
Definitely. But also imagine that you're a new employee, you're a developer yourself, you start working for a new organization, you're very good in what you do, what you're hired for, and then suddenly you miss some components to deliver your products to the organization. And by that, it could be like, who do I need to reach out to? How does this work internally? There are so many questions that sort of and inhibits people to go on with the work where they're hired for, versus going to the central place where you have got your menu card and you say, I need da 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 da, execute, and it's been built quick. Great, you can continue to work. So I think even for onboarding new employees and to do their work fast, this is the way forward.
Yeah, I recall talking to a platform team a couple years ago, sort of I think maybe when platform engineering was really just starting to emerge. And that was one of the things they highlighted, was that onboarder, once they had their platform, then they started to look into what were the barriers to getting the developers onto the platform. And they looked at, and they realized a new employee, it was like 20 something days for them to get access to all the different systems, because it was so many different requests they had to put in. And they focused on that, and they worked their way down to getting it to the point where a new developer would be on the platform within 24 hours of starting and could actually be starting to, write and deploy code into test environments, which, is huge when you think of a large organization with a lot of developers, just the amount of developer productivity that's lost for a new developer who's kind of playing the video game where they're fighting, access requests, and then they get to the big boss, right? That's like, wow, how do I get access to that system? And to your point, it's not documented anywhere, and it's blocking them from everything. And it's like Bowser at the end of, Super Mario Brothers or something. All right. Well, thank you so much, Martin. Folks tuning in next week, remember we've got James Urquhart talking about flow architecture. Then on August 21st, we'll have Mitra Goswami on generative AI. And August 28th, Donnie Burkholtz on sort of bridging that ITIL and DevOps gap. We'll be taking a break on September 4th due to the U.S. holiday, the U.S. Labor Day, not the same as the Labor Day in the rest of the world, but there you have it. Thanks again, and have a wonderful, uneventful day.
Bye, folks.